Guys, all right.
I can only see half the screen. Cool.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good to have you here this morning. We're so thrilled that you've joined us today for a nonprofit's guide to great pro bono. We are so excited about the two speakers that we have from the Taproot Foundation. Now, before I introduce both of them, I'd like to do a quick bit of housekeeping for the session so that this all goes as smoothly as possible. Just so you know, if you'd like to make the presentation a little bit bigger on your screen, if you're on a PC, you can click Control and then the plus button, and it'll make things a little larger for you on a Mac. This is the Command button and the plus sign, or of course the minus sign if you want to make it, the plus sign makes it bigger, sorry, and the minus sign makes it smaller. So just some adjustments for you depending on what your screen looks like and the size of it. Our public chat is not enabled, but the Q&A section is. So feel free if you have any questions to put those there, and I will review those questions. And as the speakers share that they have availability to answer, I will provide those to them. They may have some questions for you all. And if you have any things that you would like to share and answer to them, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A as well. To minimize your chat window, if you look at the chat window to the right, top right corner of it is a downward pointing arrow, and you can use that to minimize it and make the presentation a little bit bigger. And the session will be recorded. Session materials will be available after the event as appropriate. We have varying handouts from varying speakers. This is for the convening in general. And if they have session materials, we will be sure that they continue to be available. And you'll receive information about all of this next week. And I hope that after this session, you take a few minutes under event in your account to fill out a survey. Under event, under surveys, you'll just see a listing of surveys for this morning, and it's very short, so we hope that you will just put a few of your comments and thoughts into that survey under the name of this specific section, which listed there is Principles of Great Pro Bono Projects and Organization. That would be wonderful. And now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our two speakers. We have Alex MacArthur, who is the director at the Taproot Foundation, where she leads a team to advise Fortune 500 companies and philanthropic organizations on implementing skills-based volunteer programs. She is passionate about improving systems and attitudes which affect people with disabilities, and always laughs at a good pun. And that just makes me particularly happy. We'll have to discuss that afterward, because that is a love of mine as well when it comes to humor. And then I'd like to introduce you to Ben. He comes to the Taproot Foundation with extensive research and advisory experience spanning the private and the nonprofit sectors. He's a former and future pro bono consultant, and he is passionate about the power of pro bono as a vehicle to tackle pressing social challenges. As a director with Taproot's advisory services practice, he partners with corporations to design, implement, and scale high-quality pro bono initiatives that achieve meaningful social impact. Now, Ben, do you like a good pun too?
I was just going to say, Javita, I love a good pun.
Okay, good. Just making sure. Quick reminder for attendees, please make sure that questions go in the Q&A, as well as any responses if Alex or Ben share any questions for you all. And I will go ahead and turn it over to them. Really excited about their presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Javita, for that introduction. We're thrilled to be with everyone today at the Volunteer Florida Conference. Like Javita said, my name is Ben Nuff, a director with the Taproot Foundation based in New York City, joined by my colleague Alex, also a director on our team based in Raleigh, North Carolina. And you'll be hearing from her a bit later in the session. Thanks again for choosing to attend this session. We're very excited to share a bit more about what our organization does and how your organizations can benefit from engaging in high-quality pro bono projects. Before I provide a quick background on Taproot, Alex and I know from our experience working in the nonprofit sector that this year has been an extraordinary challenge, to put it lightly, right? There's really no other way to put it. We know that nonprofits across the country, including those of you working within or across communities in Florida, you're being profoundly impacted by multiple crises, right? Whether you're organizations that are working on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic, or whether you're an organization helping to fight for racial justice and equality for Black and Latinx communities, or whether you're an organization that's witnessed dramatic changes brought on by these upheavals. Many of you are likely seeing a staggering increase in the need for your services, while at the same time you're experiencing often the sudden loss of access to the volunteers and the venues that you've previously used to deliver those services. And we know for most nonprofits, these series of crises that we're facing have raised capacity building needs on a scale that hasn't been seen in a long time. And it's often with little access to dedicated support in a multitude of areas. And that's a great way to introduce Taproot, because we know that having access to high quality pro bono support in areas like marketing, like strategy, like data, operations, IT, and more will be an essential part of ensuring that your organizations can not only continue your work, but expand upon it during these crises and beyond. So Taproot Foundation, we were founded as a nonprofit ourselves in 2001 with the knowledge that there is a massive resource gap present in the social sector. Organizations who may very well have the solutions to our countries or our states or our communities' most pressing social challenges simply don't have the means, financial or otherwise, to carry out their missions to their fullest extent. And so Taproot was founded based on the realization that greater change can be achieved in our societies by helping to strengthen organizations like yours that are tackling our greatest challenges today. But when most people heard the term pro bono back when we were founded in 2001, they thought of free legal services. And that's still often the case today when you hear that term pro bono. So Taproot has grown based on the concept that the definition of pro bono needs to be expanded. Our mission, as you can see on the slide here, is to drive social change by leading, mobilizing, and engaging professionals in pro bono service. Talk more about pro bono and what it means in a bit, but for now, I'll just call out that we have physical locations across the US in 4 cities, but we work all over the country and increasingly across the globe as well to deliver programs and support organizations, including in Florida. We've engaged almost 23,000 professionals in this work since 2001, and the value of the pro bono that they've delivered in that time has reached over $200 million. Alex and I, like we mentioned, sit within our organization's advisory services practice, and we're the ones working closely with companies who are looking to support their grantees, like all of you, or other organizations outside of their grant-making network to connect their employees with organizations who need support. So I'm using this term support, if we go to the next slide, very broadly, right? But what I'm talking about here is directly related to an issue that's been a challenge for nonprofits probably forever. There's unquestionably a prevailing mainstream cultural belief in the US that nonprofits should have low overhead, and that low overhead is a key indicator of an organization's effectiveness. And as a result, that means that minimizing overhead is an important priority for organizations in order to attract and keep your donors. But what that leads to is a reality in which the average US nonprofit reports spending only 8.7% of its total budget on overhead expenses, compared to the 20% average traditionally spent by companies in the private sector to build a strong infrastructure. This means that nonprofits like yours and like mine, we're missing out on staff development and hiring opportunities. You're maybe making do without entire departments like marketing. Maybe you're cutting costs by continuing to delay key capacity building investments like CRM upgrades, maybe a redesign of your website or the development of an HR handbook, just to name a few. And this year, nonprofits are having to operate more leanly than ever before, meeting rising community needs, like I mentioned, while dealing with decreased access to hands-on volunteer support, canceled fundraising events, and more. Taproot actually developed a resiliency survey for nonprofits, which we conducted earlier this summer, and we found that 26% of nonprofits reported a decrease in staff size due to COVID-19, meaning that these already small and scrappy teams are making do with even less bandwidth. And we also found that 64% of nonprofits reported a decrease in funding due to COVID-19. Also, probably not terribly surprising to most, if not all of you. And so what we want to do before we dive into our main topic areas for today's discussion, Alex and I are curious to hear from all of you, right? What's keeping your organization up at night? So what we'd love for all of you to do is submit in that Q&A box that Javita mentioned. You can find it on the right-hand side of your screen, or if you press the chat function. How would you categorize your organization's most pressing need right now? What area does it fall under? So you can answer things like marketing and communications, HR, IT, strategy, finance, data, and impact reporting, right? Just curious to get a little bit of a sense of what people are thinking about right now in terms of needs for your organization. So if you want to quickly submit some of your responses, and we'll monitor them throughout. Awesome. All right, as you're filling that out, you know, everything I mentioned so far underscores everything that Alex and I are here to talk to you about today, which is tips, it's tricks, suggestions, resources, tools for all of you to consider when thinking about how to actually use pro bono to strengthen your organizations, get that support, and ultimately be able to improve the effectiveness of your programming or your services for your beneficiaries. So the agenda for today, for the rest of the session, first, we're going to level set on what pro bono is and what it isn't. Then Alex will talk about the 4 key principles to ensure that you can receive great pro bono support. I'll then share more information about ways to best secure pro bono support for your organization. And Alex will wrap us up with best practices for managing pro bono projects. We'll be sure to leave some time at the end for Q&A, but also please feel free throughout this presentation to submit your questions, and we'll pause at various points to address them. Okay, great. So let's talk about pro bono. So you might be wondering now, all of this information you just talked through sounds great in theory, but how could using pro bono play out at my organization? So to put it simply, like I said before, most organizations tackling social problems don't have access to the resources, the funding, the staff expertise needed to fully accomplish their vital missions. That lack of ability to invest in ourselves, it saps our ability to build strong, resilient, sustainable organizations. And due to global crises that we're facing right now, we're feeling the strain more than ever. And that's where pro bono can help. As I already mentioned, Taproot, we bridge the nonprofit resource gaps through connections with skilled volunteers who provide their experience pro bono in areas as wide as tech, marketing, HR, strategy, finance, and more. And for those of you who want a definition, a proper definition for pro bono, as mentioned before, it is donated professional services. That includes legal, but includes all of those other categories that are benefiting organizations working to improve society. And when I say any donated professional services, I really do mean any. It could be anything from real estate support to architecture support to HR to strategy to data to design, right? Anything that supports your organizations and makes them stronger. So on this slide, we have a chart that Taproot developed to show the various ways in which nonprofits receive support. So from left to right, you can think of community engagement on a spectrum of time invested. So in orange, you'll see the various needs that nonprofits have. And under that, in that dark gray bars, is the type of support that funders or volunteers can provide nonprofits to meet that need. So the first nonprofit need is making budget on the left-hand side of the page here. Very simply, making budgets helping organizations with financial support. So whether that's cash grants, employee giving programs, or corporate matching gifts, these are monetary donations that are helping your organizations with your operating and program costs. If we move over to the middle section of the chart, you see extra hands to deliver programs and services. And you see this straddles two areas where volunteers can help. One is hands-on volunteering. So that's when volunteers revitalize a playground or maybe serve meals at a soup kitchen, right? The next area starts to get into what we call skills-based volunteering. And there are various skills that volunteers, as you know, can help with, starting with general skills. So general skills might include volunteers helping to mentor students or tutor them in an after-school program. As we move more to the right, we're still under the skills-based volunteering bucket, but we start to meet a different type of nonprofit need around helping organizations build their infrastructure and their leadership. And here we have two types of support. First is connecting organizations to board members to provide long-term strategic guidance, governance, and oversight. And last but not least, and why we're here today, is of course pro bono expertise. So while pro bono is a type of skills-based volunteerism, we at Taproot distinguish it because in this case, you have volunteers donating their day-to-day expertise to a nonprofit organization. So that might be a marketing manager helping your organization redesign a one-pager for one of your programs. Or maybe it's an HR expert helping an organization create a more effective onboarding process for your new employees. So hopefully that chart helped you really think about how all different kinds of volunteerism can plug into your organizations, but in particular, pro bono being a powerful part of that. And briefly, before I pause for any questions and before we move on, I did want to call out that through a study we completed with chief executives for corporate purpose, originally in 2015 and then using refresh data last year, we actually determined that the average dollar value of an hour of pro bono service is $195 an hour. And that's in contrast to $27 per hour of service for hands-on volunteers that you may engage. So through this webinar today, when we say pro bono is a valuable tool, we really, really mean it, right? By infusing that use of pro bono support throughout your departments and throughout your organization, you can save money on your bottom line while also building the capacity and long-term stability for your organization. So before we turn it over to Alex, I do want to see, Javita, if there are any questions so far before Alex goes on to the 4 tests for great pro bono.
Okay, not so far, but I'm sure we'll get some as you all continue.
Awesome. And for Tamara, the slide deck will be available for you after the session. All right,
wonderful.
turn it over to Alex.
Great. Excited to get the meat of our presentation and talk about the principles for great pro bono. We've already talked a little bit about what can be addressed through pro bono. All of the functional areas that we listed in Ben's question, marketing, HR, strategy, for example, they could all be addressed through effective pro bono. So how do you have that effective pro bono? How do you think about those many needs for your nonprofit, your organization? How can they be turned into projects? Which ones do you choose? So throughout Taproot's experience facilitating good pro bono projects, we've noticed that there are certain qualities that all successful pro bono engagements share. And we've taken these qualities and turned them into 4 simple screening tests that you can use to evaluate every need for a pro bono opportunity. And these are shared on the screen here today. A solid scope, the urgency of the need, how knowledge will be transferred, and the readiness of your board and staff who will be working on the project. We'll go through each of these needs related to how you'll think about them as a test. So once you have your organizational needs kind of listed out, right, you can think about any number of HR challenges or marketing challenges you might be facing. The first test here is the size of the scope of the project. Scope is so crucial that we'll spend some good time here talking about why scoping is important and how to define that good solid scope. Before we do, I want to highlight 2 things as you think about a test for if this project is turning into a solid scope. The first is, how big is it? Completing an entire website redesign, for example, through pro bono is a very large project. It's not impossible to do, but it will take a huge, potentially year-long commitment for your organization and for the consultant. So it can get kind of unwieldy. It's a large scope. But the second is how well defined it is. A scope that simply says, let's create a new outreach strategy, is not well defined. It doesn't help a consultant understand what the project will do or if they have the right skills to do it. So we're going to share a few recommendations about how to define a solid scope. First, and you probably are getting a sense of this, here's why it's so important. This is the most foundational step for a solid pro bono project. First, it allows you to identify the right resource, the right volunteer or consultant, as we would say, for the right job. If you don't know what the job is, the scope of that work, then you won't be able to find the right skills and expertise to fulfill it. And before a potential consultant will sign on, they want to know what's being asked of them. A scope document that outlines what the work will be, how it will be done in this engagement, does that. It helps the pro bono consultant assess whether or not they have the right expertise and skills to offer, and lets you to secure the right volunteer for your organization. Nonprofits also need a scope of work they can begin planning internally, right? It helps you ask the right questions to know what will be accomplished in this project, how much of the time will be needed for staff, what other resources will be required to support the pro bono consultant. And finally, it sets expectations for your nonprofit and for the pro bono consultant about what will get done and what won't get done, which is really crucial for a smooth project. So there are four key scoping elements that we want you to think about as you outline for a pro bono project. Before we do that, I wanted to share that one of the most common reasons that a pro bono project might fail is that participants allow the scope to expand too far and they run out of time to deliver a quality deliverable. We call that scope creep. So we want to really lock in and consider the following components to help you define what that scope is, to keep it in bounds and really make sure that you get a solid pro bono project completed. So first and foremost is obviously what's in scope, right? What are the key steps to this project? What are the final deliverables that you'll receive from your consultant at the end of the project? Sometimes the section might even include a work plan, right? What are those deliverables along the way and the steps of how you'll get there? Next is what's out of scope. What won't happen within this project? For example, what's not possible within your resource or bandwidth constraints for your organization? Next, you want to zoom out a little bit and define success. Everyone wants to know how they'll get that A and how they'll really complete the project. So keep impact in mind and make sure you've outlined what success looks like for your organization and for the project, and stay within that box. Be sure to share how the completing the project will impact your organization and your beneficiaries. This is really motivating for your potential volunteers. It also allows them to make suggestions about deliverables that might really help you to meet those strategic goals, even if it's not outlined in that exact in-scope area. And then finally, it can be helpful to outline some logistics, especially in this virtual setting we're all in. What is the timeline that you have to commit to the project and that you're asking of your consultant? Do you need a team of people to work on the project? Would that be most helpful? Or do you think an individual and having that one-on-one commitment and connection is going to accomplish what you need? What's your budget within your organization to be able to provide resources depending on the recommendations that the consultant is providing? Can you purchase a tool that they might recommend, or do you really need to do all of this completely pro bono or without additional resources? Having these conversations internally helps you to write out the answers to each of these questions. And then voila, you have a solid scope of work that's really helped you thought through what the project will look like. Let's go through a quick example to bring this to life. So on the slide here, there are a few examples of common capacity needs that we see all the time from nonprofits who come to Taproot. So maybe you're thinking about how you measure the impact of your work across different programs that you're running. Perhaps you have an HR challenge related to some staff turnover that's happening. Or we're also seeing plenty of nonprofits right now really recognizing the need to diversify their stakeholders, such as volunteers. We're going to dig into the first example here, the impact analysis need. So an organization has thought through really the need to evaluate their impact across programs, and they've come up with a solid scope. So I'm going to share it here. To address this need, the organization could take a few different paths, but they've decided that the foundational way to address the need that they're facing is to identify key performance indicators that the organization can track across those many programs. They're not doing that level of impact or kind of roll up of impact right now. So the organization identified that deliverable, what was in and out of scope related to what the consultant would provide. The consultant could review existing data, for example, but is not going to be asked to clean the data across their programming. That's a different project for a different time. The nonprofit concretely shared what the measure of success is for this program. 6 new KPIs that can be shared with funders to tell the story of their impact and ultimately increase their funding from donors. By completing this, they'll know if they were successful, and they can also share that success with their consultant, which is really powerful. As you can see on the slide here, the scope also documents what documents or background materials will support this project, and which will be shared with the pro bono consultant. So for this scope, the documents might include the survey questions that they're asking across programs and the programmatic data. It's really important that this organization thought through that in advance, because they might have to scrub some of that data, either cleaning it so it's ready for the pro bono consultant, or, for example, taking out some of that identifying information about their constituents. You also might want to consider in a scope of work, as this organization did, what a consultant would need to complete the project. What should their background be? What technical skills do they need to have? For this project, they need to have data analysis, impact measurement, and it's really helpful that the organization's already thought through this so that they can ask about the consultant's expertise and really drill into it to make sure that the right person to do this project. Taking the time to outline each element for your project or the need that you might have thought of that Ben asked you about at the top of this call will ensure that your organization is internally aligned. Everyone's on the same page, ready to engage in the project. And it also shows any potential consultant that you're really invested in this project. You've thought it through and you're ready to go. All right, let's go on to our next test for great pro bono, urgency. If your need that you thought of is urgent, meaning that if it really doesn't happen within a set timeline, that could be tomorrow or next week, then it's likely not a great fit for pro bono. For example, if the project is really a matter of keeping your doors open, then we wouldn't recommend it for a long-term pro bono project, right? It's too risky in many ways, because we find that pro bono projects generally are completed about 50 to 100% slower than expected. That might be surprising, but we'd also share that paid consultants are generally about 25 to 50% slower than completing their project than expected. So it's not that paid work meets every deadline, but pro bono does tend to be slower. So as you think about those needs, if your project, again, has that absolute deadline coming up, it may be more important to prioritize internally or to pay someone to do it. For example, engaging a pro bono auditor for a week before your audit is due to IRS, not a great idea. We wouldn't recommend that. But that said, if you do need a quick bite-sized troubleshooting or problem-solving session, a quick consultation from an expert, that can be helpful to provide an urgent or timely support. So Ben's going to describe a little bit later about how you can meet a more urgent need through our free platform called Taproot Plus. But as you think about your needs for your organization, identifying a strategic priority to be completed through pro bono is likely going to be more helpful for your organization than identifying that as something incredibly urgent or really, really burning for your organization. Our next test here is knowledge transfer. You should think about knowledge transfer in 2 ways. So first, pro bono projects generally take some level of knowledge transfer from your organization to your consultant. And so you need to be ready to provide that knowledge or information to your consultant. So just for example, if you're completing a marketing strategy, there's a lot of information that you'll likely need to exchange back and forth through with your consultant. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the Managing Great Pro Bono section. You should be ready to invest that time to share the information back and forth. In contrast, hiring or having a pro bono consultant just take a few pictures at a gala or doing some video editing for a fundraising campaign, that will likely take less back and forth, less information sharing for them. The consultant doesn't need to know quite as much information or detailed context about your organization, but they still need to understand the essence of what you want to capture and how you want to tell the story. So as you think about your different needs, think about if you're confident that you and your staff have time and the right information already gathered to be able to transfer that knowledge or provide that information to your consultant. But I also want you to think about the knowledge transfer that a consultant will need to do at the end of the project. As they hand off the project to you, make sure that you have all the information and recommendations that you need to move the project forward without them. A good pro bono project it really makes you ready to deliver the support after you've received the deliverable from your consultant. A project that will require ongoing support from a consultant is really not a good idea. You're not going to be able to likely keep them engaged or on staff, so to speak, for an extended period of time. So if you don't think that your staff can be successfully trained on the information needed to take the project forward, for example, if the project is especially technical or requires coding expertise that you don't have, it may not meet that knowledge transfer test. Finally, the last test is staff and board readiness. Does your organization really want this? Is it a priority for you? Ideally, as you've gone through the scope of work and that scoping process, you've all gotten on the same page and you are more internally aligned. But keep in mind, if you're feeling that others in the organization, especially those that would be intimately involved in the project, say your marketing person or your executive director, if they're not convinced that this is a priority for the organization, don't move forward with pro bono. It will be a waste of your time and a waste of the consultant's time. Really think about, is this going to be something that your staff and board are ready to take on and excited to commit to? I'm going to stop here to see if there are any questions about the 4 tests for great pro bono before we go into some recommendations about how to secure the right pro bono consultant for your organization. Javita, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do have one. I'm going to go ahead and share. Hi, Elizabeth. This is Jovita. So glad that you're here with us today. This one says there are a couple different questions, so I'm just going to read them all to start with. How can we make the $195 hourly rate work for us when we have professionals working for us? Is that something to incorporate in our budget when someone is serving in a pro bono capacity? Does it apply for a consistent staff person who volunteers?
Yeah, I think part of what I'm hearing from that is making sure that you're kind of paying for the expertise that you needed. I think the valuation piece is part of what we think about in terms of how you might evaluate an in-kind donation, right? So if you're getting in-kind furniture, for example, you might be able to write that off or put that, within your budget or how you're receiving donations. Pro bono service is similar, right? It is helpful to have the valuation to be able to say, wow, we received X dollar amount through pro bono service, and being able to count that within your donations, your impact reporting, and potentially being able to share that with your consultants to say, thank you, right? You didn't write us a check for this amount, but you did provide the service that helped us just in a similar way. But then what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think what's also important to call out is that on average, we find through Taproot Plus, which I'm going to go through in a minute, usually a pro bono consultant is working for an average of 30 hours on a project with a nonprofit. So we find that the average value of the pro bono services that are delivered are about $6,000 per project. And that's only if you're working with one volunteer. Often nonprofits are working with multiple volunteers or teams. So the value of that and the impact of that work could be even greater. And so like Alex said, it's more to understand what the in-kind support your organizations are getting.
And Elizabeth, let us know if we didn't answer the crux of your question. Feel free to follow up as well. We'll have some more time there. But other questions, Peter?
I don't see any right now, but we'll keep monitoring it.
Perfect. All right.
Great. Well, so now that you have a good idea for how to scope a good pro bono project, you're probably wondering, well, how do I find somebody with the right skills to get the project done well and for free? And that's where Taproot can help. Before we go into the main area that we want to talk about today, which is Taproot Plus, I do want to call out that there are so many different channels where you can find volunteers to support your organizations. And it starts with your own network, right? Whether it's your current volunteers or your current board members, leverage their network, their insights, their expertise to help support some of the needs that your organization has. Corporations are a huge one. Like Alex and I mentioned at the beginning, we're part of a team at Taproot that engages companies in developing pro bono programs to support nonprofits like yours. So there might be companies that you have existing relationships with, or maybe not, that are looking to provide pro bono service to their communities. And that's a great way to find pro bono support. Professional services firms are also a great way to find pro bono. They're naturally consultative in the work that they do, right? So a lot of those organizations have pretty established pro bono programs, and it really helps them attract and retain talent at their organizations as well. Professional schools do pro bono for the educational benefit of their students and to attract top students that are looking for real world opportunities to augment that classroom experience. Many offer internships for current students or require pro bono consulting for certain classwork, or even encourage alumni to do pro bono work through their alumni organizations. And then finally, intermediaries provide pro bono to create social impact. And that's what we're going to talk about today in terms of how you can begin accessing some of these great programs for your organizations. So at Taproot, we've made things simple and streamlined through our free online nonprofit volunteer matching platform called Taproot Plus. We designed Taproot Plus to be flexible and nimble so that any nonprofit can get skilled volunteers, no matter how big you are, no matter how small you are, and any business professional can support a nonprofit no matter where they're located, and it's completely free to use. This is Taproot's way, really scaling up the pro bono movement and making sure that all of those who want to use pro bono have a way to do so from the safety of your own homes. Currently, Taproot Plus, it's open to all registered nonprofits, so 501c3s, public schools, and other fiscally sponsored social good organizations across the US. And it's also actually available in the UK, in the EU, and in India as well. And it has over 75,000 total users. And we really try to empower nonprofits to find pro bono solutions to their challenges on their own timetable. So you don't need to necessarily wait for specific funding for projects that required skilled volunteer assistance. Also important to call out that there's no limit to the number of staff members at your nonprofit who can have an account on Taproot Plus. So feel free to forward this information to some of your colleagues who can also benefit from virtual volunteer support. So to get started, really easy, all you'll need to do is pull up a browser and head over to www.taprootplus.org. And once you're there, you can either hit sign up or submit a request to get started. Then you'll just need to fill out a few details about your organization, just some basic information. And then once you fill out that basic information, you'll just need to verify your email, which is an important step in the process. So on the next slide is a walkthrough of what the Taproot Plus process will look like. So once you submitted all your account details and confirmed your email, you're ready to post a request for pro bono. You'll have two main options when submitting a request: submitting a project request or submitting a request for a consultative session. So before diving into the weeds of designing and posting a project and going through the process that's outlined on the slide, I do want to quickly talk about requesting a consultation session. As Alex mentioned before, in case you're stuck or aren't sure what projects you might need, we've added a feature to the website where you can request a 1-hour session with a subject matter expert to talk through your particular project need. This is a really great option if you're brainstorming, let's say, campaign strategy or fundraising strategy, or you might need quick answers on specific questions. You'll let us know the type of consultation you're looking for and a brief description of your needs or questions, and then we'll make sure that you're finding the right consultant who can help you support that answer to the question. But going back to the main use of Taproot Plus, I'd say about 85% of nonprofits on our platform use the project feature, and that's to submit those project requests. And so the way it works is, number one, a nonprofit will tell us about their challenge or about what they hope to achieve with pro bono. Number two, Taproot staff behind the scenes will review that project request. We'll consult with you if the project needs any edits, and then we'll promote the project to recruit applicants interested in volunteers and so on. The volunteers will search through open projects and apply for the ones that they're qualified for based on their skill sets. Third, Taproot then helps the volunteer applicant and the nonprofit set up a phone screen to feel out the fit between the volunteer and your organization. And I want to mention here that your organization is the one that ultimately moves forward with the professional, the volunteer, that you believe is best suited for the project. So you're really in the driver's seat in terms of getting to choose which volunteer is the right fit to support you in your need at the time. And then finally, number four is you get started on your project with resources and from wraparound and ongoing oversight and support from Taproot. As a reminder, no limit to how many of these projects you can request at one time or the number of participants from your organization that are on the platform. But we do recommend sticking with one or two at a time to allow for effective project management on your end. Okay. What I want to focus on now is tips for posting pro bono projects that will make it even more likely that a volunteer will raise their hand to support your need. And these tips are relevant regardless of whether you're seeking out pro bono support through Taproot Plus or through other channels of finding volunteers. So first, you'll tell us, as you can see on the slide here, what your challenge or desired project outcome is by being clear and concrete about it. On Taproot Plus, we focus on projects in the areas of marketing and communications, accounting and finance, business and program planning, HR and IT, but that allows for a ton of project types to be posted within each of those broader categories. So again, first and foremost is about being clear and concrete in your ask. So what does that mean in practice? For the ask to be clear, you don't need to get to that full scope like Alex outlined before. You're going to do that in partnership with your selected volunteer. But what you do need to do is make sure that the final deliverable and the ultimate goal of your project is clear. In terms of being concrete, that means not using, kind of wishy-washy language, unclear language. It's really being specific and confident in what you say. And on Taproot Plus, the first section of the project request form asks you to describe what are you hoping for a consultant to deliver. So in this section, as you can see, you want to describe the activities, the deliverables, maybe the specific chunks of work that'll be accomplished by the individual or a team. And where possible, you'll hopefully include specific estimates of the quantity or depth of activity at that step. So for example, as you can see on the slide here, we need somebody to review 3 years of Google Analytics data to help us know, 1, who uses our website, 2, where our users are coming from, and 3, trends related to our overall growth. You can almost think of each project as kind of like a job role or job description. And of course, if you need some advice on how to make that ask really tight, you can reach out to any of our Taproot colleagues through our help desk, which is a feature on Taproot Plus. And we'll work with you personally and advise you on setting up a consultation session to help brainstorm of what exactly your organization needs in order to solve your challenge, so you can get that clear and concrete ask. Second tip, create a compelling pitch to generate excitement. So the second question that you'll be filling out to submit your project request on Taproot Plus is create a compelling pitch to attract volunteers to your project. Why is this project a priority for you at this stage? What exciting work are you doing that makes this a good investment of pro bono hours? So it's critical here to tell the volunteer about what makes your organization and the work you do great. And this is all about volunteer recruitment. So it's about attracting more of the top talent that you're looking for by selling volunteers on what your organization does and how this project will help make you better. So if we move on to this example, it's critically important to stress when you're seeking out pro bono, you really need to pitch your project, right? The content that you submit is the content that volunteers will review. And there are a lot of projects for them to search through, so you want to make yours stand out. And I'm not going to read through this whole example, but what you can see at the end of this example is this organization says doing this analysis, right, of their Google Analytics data will enable our organization to help policymakers, educators, and the business community be better informed about how student career interests are evolving, right? So they're making it very clear about what the potential impact of this work could be. And that really draws volunteers to pro bono work. Last but not least, demonstrate readiness. So explain what you and others at your organization have done to prepare to make the most out of this pro bono project. So that last question that you're going to be answering in submitting a pro bono project request on Taproot Plus is tell the volunteer what you've done to prepare for this project and how you plan to implement the deliverable. This can be often really a great wake-up call for organizations who may realize that in order to recruit a volunteer for a specific need, you may actually need to have X, Y, or Z prepared ahead of time. And when you're putting this last piece together, make sure to highlight what's in it for the volunteer, right? What's their return on investment going to be for them? Sometimes a good implementation plan on how you'll use their work is all a volunteer asks for. And this piece really ensures that everyone's time is going to be used efficiently and effectively. So to take this last example on the slide, again, pretty long, but the nonprofit in this case highlights who's supporting the project, what they've done to get the volunteer ready to dig into their analytics, and what this project and analysis will lead to for the organization. Okay. So those are our posting tips, and that's it. After you fill out those 3 questions, it's only 3 questions, your project ask will be submitted and ready for review by our Taproot Plus team. So what happens next? After the project's approved, it'll get its own listing on Taproot Plus, and we'll also share your project with skilled volunteers by sharing it on LinkedIn's volunteer marketplace. And we'll also send personal recommendation emails to volunteers who are registered on Taproot Plus that have the right skills to meet your need. Then you'll interview those applicants and you'll pick the one volunteer who you wish to select for the job. Once you select that volunteer, your listing will close, but there is an option to keep the project open to accept additional volunteers, and there are occasional projects where more than one volunteer will support your project. One final note about Taproot Plus before I turn it back over to Alex to close this out is that we've recently developed a new feature to the site where you can choose from a list of pre-scoped projects for a handful of our most requested needs from nonprofits. And that includes things like web design, HR assessments, board recruitment, financial analysis, and crisis communications. These scopes include all of the best practices for how you describe your project outcome and your goals, activities that'll be completed as part of the project, activities out of scope, volunteer skills needed, things like that. So it really takes you to the next level and being able to quickly get pro bono support. Again, brand new feature just out of development. So as you log on to Taproot Plus and start using the platform, we're really curious to hear what your experience is like so that we can make it even better for organizations like yours. We'll pause here just to see if there are any questions before we move on to our last piece. Doesn't look like there's anything new submitted. So Alex, I'll turn it back over to you to close us out with managing pro bono.
Wonderful. We have 3 best practices for managing pro bono, and this is for managing pro bono, whether it's through Taproot Plus, as Ben just mentioned, or any other setting where you're pulling in a pro bono consultant. And these are also relevant for our virtual setting, as you'll see here. So first and foremost, I think it's really important to acknowledge that pro bono usually means that you're working across sectors. Your consultant is likely to come from the private sector, have their own business experience or the expertise that you're really wanting to leverage for your organization. That's where the magic happens for pro bono. But they also may not have as much information as you would want them to have about the nonprofit sectors, or certainly about your organization. They may even have assumptions about nonprofits that they're bringing in. And so we want to make sure that you spend the time to really help to bridge that experience and bridge those sectors as well. So we encourage you to take the time upfront to help your consultant do the necessary discovery work to really understand your work, the organization, and your work in the community, maybe even understanding the systems in which you're working with and the impact you're trying to have in the community. It can be tempting to rush through this discovery process, right? You're eager to get the deliverable that they're going to create for you, but it's really important that you really take the time for your consultant to really understand those components. That will help them to really make sure that the deliverable that they're creating is the right deliverable for you and works within your context. So providing your consultant the right connections and information upfront can really help them begin the project with momentum, with motivation, and the right information that they need. So think through how they'll connect with the right stakeholders, potentially doing some interviews with your volunteers, your beneficiaries, certainly staff and board members, things like that. We also encourage you to take the time to understand your consultant, what they're bringing to the table, and remembering that you're an expert at the table too. You have the industry knowledge, you are the expert within your organization and nonprofit sector, so make sure you're leveraging that, you're sharing that with them. We hear so often that pro bono is a two-way learning street, right? The consultant's learning so much and you are as well, and you're really getting something that's helpful for your organization. Finally, want to share that it's really important for you to not only share this context, share the information about the sector, but also really what's bringing you to desire this pro bono support now. We see successful projects happen when the nonprofit is really willing to share why they're submitting the challenge in the first place, why it's important to their growth and their impact, and also what have been barriers to meeting this need in the past. It can be hard to share some of that dirty laundry, but really important to share if your organization has attempted to solve this in the past and maybe has failed for a certain reason, or what's really prevented you from investing in this or solving this problem in the first place. This can really inform how the consultant is considering their recommendations and the deliverable that they'll create for you. Sharing the context, the constraints that you're under will help ensure that the consultant is creating something that's the right size and isn't recommending a solution, for example, that costs thousands of dollars if you're not ready to put budget against it. In addition to bridging the sectors, communication and collaboration is key. This probably goes without saying, but establishing key norms, team norms, are really, really important at the outset of any pro bono engagement. Set those relationship guidelines about how you'd like to interact and communicate with one another, especially because this pro bono project, or if you're doing anything through Taproot Plus, will be taking place virtually. We often recommend, depending on the size of the project or how in-depth it is, that pro bono teams set up recurring weekly check-ins with their volunteers. So think about which staff need to be involved in those check-ins or when you're bringing in other staff periodically, and set those communication norms. Thinking about how you'll communicate on that regular basis. Is it through email? Is that most effective? Is it Zoom? Is it the phone? Is it texting for you? Really setting that up at the outset, make sure that you're getting the information you need, and so is your consultant. And then two of the best ways that we see successful collaboration happening is by providing feedback to your team or your consultant and to making sure you put in some time to iterate. This is about really being an active thought partner throughout the pro bono engagement and holding your consultant to the expectations you've set at the outset, going back to that scoping document, of course. So this means that you and your consultant should develop solutions together. Take strategic pauses throughout the project to discuss unexpected opportunities or issues. That's that iteration piece. If there's a change in direction for your project, right? If you came up with a really new innovation as you started to iterate, make sure it's intentional. Make sure you're grounded in the North Star for your organization, its strategic goals, and then adjust the scope accordingly, making sure it's feasible within the timeline that you've outlined. The most effective pro bono projects go through multiple stages of discovery, solution development, and iteration. So make sure you provide room for that. That's part of why pro bono can take a little longer than other projects. And then finally, just really important for you to set aside time to review in-progress deliverables with your consultants. You want to make sure you have a sense all along the pro bono engagement what the consultant is building for you and making sure you're providing feedback so it is the right deliverable or right solution for your organization. We know, and we've experienced this at Taproot, that sometimes it's hard to be giving feedback to your consulting team. They're providing their support for free, which is fantastic, but they really want this project to be successful for you. And so that means providing direct and honest feedback for them. What's working about what they're building, what's not, what ideas do you have as well? Pro bono projects can be a significant investment of time for them and for you. So really making sure you're acting like that paid client, getting what you want out of the program, out of the project, because that's what they want. They want this project to be useful, sustainable, and worth the investment on both sides. Our final tip here is all around our virtual collaboration. This new virtual world provides opportunity. It means that you can work with a consultant from anywhere in the country or even globally right now, but it does present some obstacles. So make sure you discuss initially, again, how you'll collaborate virtually. Do you want to see deliverables in advance so you can mark them up? Or do you want the consultant to walk you through the deliverables in real time by Google Docs or Mural? Make sure you think through how you'll share documents, especially if they're sensitive in nature. Is it through a Dropbox or a Google Drive? How will your consultant access the information they need? And then finally, use video. Take time at the top of meetings to build rapport. It can really go a long way. Intentionally building that relationship with your team or with the individual consultant you're working with helps you come from a place of trust and empathy, even if you've never met in person. So with that, we have just a few more minutes for questions. We've really enjoyed walking you through some principles of great pro bono, sharing the importance of scoping, the tests of urgency, knowledge sharing, and staff readiness. We've shared how you might secure pro bono services, including through Taproot Plus, and then provide some management tips. So we'll open it up to questions, and we'll also note our emails at the end of the deck here in case you have additional questions that arise later on. Thank you so much. Javita, do we have any other questions from chat box?
Hello, all. We did have one. First of all, we got an awesome presentation from somebody, so we're just real thankful to have you all, and just tremendous information. Somebody did ask about fingerprinting background checks. I think that might be kind of interesting in terms of professionals and whether or not that's something that you've seen that people do or you recommend.
Yeah, I think it depends on the sensitivity of the information, what you're sharing throughout the pro bono project. Also thinking about the risk threshold for your organization. So at Taproot, we sort of leave it up to you all in terms of what information you require from a background check perspective. We do often see sometimes nonprofits appreciate doing some sort of NDA or having just a signed scope of work that commits the consultant and vice versa. Other consultants will ask for or require a limit loss liability form as well, so they can't be held, fully accountable in terms of from a risk perspective or a liability perspective. At Taproot, we have some suggestions for resources for that on our website, but really you'll want to think about what is the information that you're sharing, what's the risk threshold that you have for sharing that information, and then what type of documentation would make sense. Ben, anything you'd add?
Nope, that was great.
Great, and one more question. In terms of conversion from pro bono volunteer to donor, you see that a lot of times with volunteers, they become invested, end up being people who contribute. Do you have any, have you seen any of that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And the short answer to that is yes, right? It happens all the time. Pro bono volunteering is a great entry point for a volunteer to really be interested in the work that you're doing and get really involved in it. And so we see the transition from volunteer to donor all the time. We also see pro bono volunteers in particular transition from volunteer to board member. That's often a really great entry point for a volunteer to get a good sense of some of the organization's opportunities and potential some areas for growth or for need that can help round out your board. These are often skilled volunteers who have a significant number of years of experience, since pro bono is all about using those skills that you build up in your career. So they tend to often be a little bit more senior than junior, and often translate into either a donor or a board member.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Well, I am just so grateful for the time that you all have put into this presentation, to being with us here today. Just as a reminder for everybody, would love for you to fill out the survey. It's under event and event and then surveys. It's very short. And so we would love to just hear from you all. I know a number of you have just put in the chat box that this was really beneficial for you. So we would love that, that feedback from you all. That would just be great. And then any handouts that Alex and Ben have, those are going to be available under session, under the session, under agenda. The same way that you clicked in, that's where they will be. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, Ben, Alex, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we are just so thrilled, Volunteer Florida personally, about the work that Taproot does and continuing to see the great work that you all do in terms of supporting nonprofits. So thank you all so much.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, everyone.
We have a 15-minute break, and then the next sessions will begin.